Well, thanks for joining the final webinar in the first half of the year series. Today we'll be talking about something a lot of folks have been asking for and about how you can go about managing your Waterfall and your Agile projects with a combination of Microsoft Project Online and Azure DevOps, which is one of Microsoft's developer operations suite. We do have some upcoming events. We have an event in the end of July being held in person in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It'll be our Project Online Roadshow, July 24th from 9 to 2. If you'd like to register, the link is here and we'll be sending this out as well. It's a great opportunity to get hands-on with some of the Microsoft PPM technologies. We'll also be talking about Agile and Waterfall in that session, resource management, lots of good topics folks have interest in. All the webinars that we do deliver are available on our Vimeo Showcase channel. If you go to vimeo.com/showcases and look up the number 528-8659, you will see all the webinars listed there. And I think we've got about a dozen of those that we're going to be able to provide you access to. Our agenda for today, we'll do some quick introduction into who is Progility, for those of you who don't know us. Then we'll get right into the core topic today, the difference between managing Waterfall and Agile projects. We'll give you a little bit of background about something we learned 3 years ago on a project with a client who had these needs. We'll then get into something we learned a year ago with a client that had similar needs that are a little bit different from an outcome perspective and a little different where they are in the maturity cycle. Then we'll get right into the tools. We'll talk about PPM Project Online and Azure DevOps, which tool does what from an overall project management and reporting perspective. From there, we will actually show you some examples of that in the systems. We'll give you some deployment best practices if you're going to be moving forward, some things to plan for, and then how you can go about teaming with us to build a successful implementation plan and strategy. If you do have questions, we'll be taking those at the end of the webinar. A little bit about Progility for those who don't know us. We are a specialized consulting firm known for our work in the Microsoft PPM space. Typically, clients will come to us when they can't easily explain what's going on across all their projects. They often don't know what resources are working on what, and they can't get consistent reports, metrics, and dashboards out to make business-based decisions about their projects, their portfolios, and their resources. We are based in Chevy Chase, Maryland, at offices in Miami, Houston, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. And we've worked with literally hundreds of clients over the last 15 years to help them successfully plan and implement PPM solutions. But let's talk about some of the challenges. And first, we'll talk at more of an executive or portfolio level with managing different types of projects, and then we'll talk more at the day-to-day level. When we talk to executives, and this is all based off feedback from them, we find there's an initial disconnect between what executives and stakeholders are looking to get out of projects, whether they're Agile or Waterfall, and the teams that are delivering them specifically on the Agile side. I think on the Waterfall side, we all have a lot of history there, but in an Agile environment, the real outputs are looking for strong offerings, quick time to market, moving to a product-centric versus a project-centric organization or structure, and being able to grow revenue and be a lot more agile, not to use the term agile in different ways. So, executives are expecting using some of the tools and the outputs to do value analysis. What kind of a return on investment are we getting for the investments? And the ability to track their progress at a high level. What are the themes? What epics are being delivered? What are the value streams that are being delivered across the business, start to end? And financially, what kind of return on investment and financial benefit are we seeing? On the Agile side, the folks that are actually carrying out the Agile projects, they typically use IDEs or integrated development environments, tools like Azure DevOps, which is the core Microsoft tool, used to be called Visual Studio or VSTS. And then they're tracking their work at a different level. They're tracking sometimes at a program level, sometimes at a feature level, sometimes at a story level that rolls up to features. They've got different sprints, which is really the timing on the work that's being performed. And then they've got different release trains where they're going to be releasing different functionality in different products or sub-products. So if you think about it, there's an initial disconnect between what the executives are expecting and what the teams are initially delivering and measuring. When we start to look at the day-to-day challenges now at an execution level, you've got project managers and sometimes scrum masters. Often project managers don't have real visibility into a lot of the development schedules. Things are being managed really in sprints and iterations, and they're rolling from one to another based off of the different trains and the work that's being performed. We find a lot of the project managers aren't able to really react quickly to changes that are occurring. New requirements, new stories, new features, new iterations. They don't often understand the development issues and development cycles that are going on, and they're trusting really the scrum master or the sprint teams to really deliver on those. They really often don't know what teams are working on what efforts. They understand that certain resources are dedicated to certain activities, but they don't necessarily know if those resources are dedicated, if they're shared, what other work they're doing. They want to do some resource forecasting and planning. Typically in an Agile world, resources are dedicated to specific projects, but are they working on other things as well, and do I have an allocation issue? And also they want to know, when are work products going to be delivered? That's always kind of the mystery behind the Agile projects as we're doing them. On the developer side, developers and development team leads are often using different tool sets than the project managers are using to measure their progress. They're managing in sprints and iterations and features and stories, which are typical on Agile projects. And those are often rolling up to epics, which are rolling up to your sprint trains. There's really not a lot of automation for changes. And what we mean by that is, and you'll see, when a developer goes in to update the progress, started in progress done, when it's going to be completed, there's not a lot of approval for that. It's just getting done, it's getting marked, and that's it. So the project manager often doesn't know if there's a problem in that process or that cycle. Often they don't have visibility into the specific issues the development teams are running into, and there's not a lot of timeline accountability. Often work is pushed out based off of the resources workload and what they can actually accomplish, as well as the different sprints they're involved in. What we do see in common for your project managers and your developers, one on the PM side, one more on the DevOps side, is resource forecasting and a need to do utilization planning. Project budgeting, how much do we have, what are we spending, and what's remaining? That's really important. We've got to do some kind of delivery schedule forecasting. Typically in a waterfall world, we have a flow down waterfall schedule, but in an Agile world, it's a little more fluid and flexible. Also measuring benefits and benefits realization, and how are we going to get value out of the investments we're making, as well as being able to do top-level portfolio management. What should we be investing in? When should we be doing that? And what kind of value are we looking for? So these are more at a day-to-day management challenge, and rolling that up to what they have in common. And we can actually start to line this up, and there are different planning cycles. If we look at an Agile organization versus more of a linear waterfall organization, Agile projects, you have more of an iterative development process with shorter cycles. Shorter run cycles. Scope is included, and the sprints are very, very fluid. Cost is sometimes difficult to forecast because we're not exactly sure when specific work products are going to be produced, because they're rolling from sprint to sprint. We're aiming for minimum viable product and then improving on that product over time. The focus has always been on value delivery versus cost. So we're looking at measuring that value and making sure we're doing that accurately. We're rolling things up at summary level as an epic for functional and system based. And then we don't really have a concept of any kind of a milestone. There's really no thought of an end date and no real scope. If we think more in the linear planning cycles, and this is for traditional organizations, they're doing annual budgeting, they've got business goals and a vision, they've got proposals coming in and business cases that are being funded, they're going through strategic portfolio analysis and selection, IT governance, all the portfolio management, and then managing by results and objectives, and handling changes as they occur. So if we look at organizations that are trying to adopt Agile when they're more linear from a planning perspective, we see there are a lot of challenges there. So really kind of coming up with a blended or a hybrid approach is really what's going on, and really best practice in industry is kind of wrapping Agile procedures and practices from a delivery perspective into more of a linear planning or budgeting cycle. It's very hard to do Agile across the board. We find very few organizations are fully Agile or safe Agile at this point. So it's really usually a combination of both. And when we talk about Agile project management, fundamentally it is different from your traditional waterfall project management. Project work is following a much more cyclical path. If we think about the different players, we've got the Scrum Master, we've got the product owner, then we've got end users we're interfacing with on a regular basis to get their feedback. Then we're actually interfacing with the stakeholders who are looking for the results. And then we've got team members that are actually doing the implementation work, often developers. This process is a lot less rigid. It evolves the work over time, and that time can often be very, very flexible. So we look at from a process perspective of individuals and iterations over a specific lifecycle process. We're looking to produce some kind of a working product or working software over documentation. So documentation is really an afterthought within the Agile world. Collaboration with end users is ongoing, which actually gets the end users involved in seeing the product early, the minimum viable product, and iterating on that. And we're always responding to change. We're not as concerned about the process and the planning as we are to change. So you can inherently see, if you start to adopt Agile in a more linear waterfall world, it becomes very, very challenging from a tracking and reporting perspective, as well as a cultural perspective. So if we start to break out, the different workflow that's required, and on the left we have what a PPM system would traditionally manage, and on the right-hand side we have what a DevOps system or an IDE like Azure DevOps would traditionally manage. Left side, we have projects, which you all know have a name, an owner, a description, lots of metadata and information about them, costs. We're going to have tasks that are a part of a schedule that have names and priorities, start and finish dates, and resources are assigned to specific tasks or activities, and we can have multiple resources associated with them. We then have work. We have planned work, remaining work, and actual work, and what the forecast is. So we've got multiple fields of information we're capturing, and that's going to help us forecast forward. If we look more on the DevOps side on the right, in an Agile world, we've got epics, which are typically our highest level below our products. We've got a name of an epic, an owner, and a description. Then we've got a backlog, and that's going to have a summary. It's going to have priorities or prioritization, a start and finish date on the sprint, the status of it, and then the resource or resources that are responsible for that. And then finally, we have time instead of work. We've got an estimate, we've got remaining, and some kind of a sense of time spent. So in an Agile world, we're starting our project ideally in PPM because we're going and we're doing the project initiation and approval. We're rolling it over and we're doing all the management and updating in our Azure DevOps system. And then we're going to ideally flow some kind of an update back to our project managers who are in the PPM world so they can status that and roll that up to management. We're also doing, and one of the pain points is really capacity allocation. By looking at what's going on in our DevOps system, do we have the right level of information to make decisions on resources? That's one of the key points, which also impacts our costs and how long things are going to take. So these are really at a challenge level. We're looking at the WBS, the capacity allocation, and the project initiation. So I want to give you a little bit of a story of something we learned 3 years ago of a specific client brought us in, a large regional healthcare provider. They were in the process and they brought us in to specifically to deploy Project Online for PPM and then marry that up with what was called VSTS or Visual Studio Team Services, which is now called Azure DevOps, to support Agile PM and updates to Agile. So we were brought in to do that specific set of tasks and deploy those systems. They had already deployed VSTS and DevOps. It was already in place. So that was one of the challenges, and I'll get into that in a second. So some of the things we learned from this deployment, this was 3 years ago, PPM was being used and set up successfully to support project intake, demand allocation and demand management, resource planning and resource management, and all the things needed to do successfully. And then the idea was they were going to use VSTS to actually track the progress of the Agile projects, but Waterfall projects would happen in PPM. One of the challenges we ran into is they had set up DevOps or VSTS before they set up PPM, and they decided not to really have a unified methodology for how they did it. They left it up to every development team to come up with their strategy for how they were going to be managing their projects. And what this led to is no single set of templates and no methodology in VSTS, led to confusion, led to inconsistent data, and it led to the inability to map progress in VSTS over to what was in project and the templates that were there. So because we didn't have a one-to-one and there was no actual consistent methodology set up in DevOps, a project in PPM did not equal a project in VSTS. It actually mapped to multiple projects that had multiple structures, which couldn't cleanly map over to a WBS or set of activities. Because this mapping didn't occur, it became impossible to do any kind of data integration or even reporting across the two systems. So the client had to actually back off, and then reporting and time tracking became very, very hard because as you'll see, a DevOps system like Azure DevOps doesn't have a timesheet. It doesn't think of things in a time-phased way, whereas a tool like Project Online does. So we had challenges with reporting and time tracking. The lesson learned here is that what you want to do if you're thinking about going down this road with two tools and working together is align the processes on both sides first. So make sure you have a good solid methodology in your DevOps tool, implement a solid methodology in PPM, and that's typically done from the beginning because the PPM side is typically run by a PMO. And make sure there's some kind of an agreed upon Agile process prior to putting your DevOps tool in place and start to integrate it, or you'll end up with what we call the Wild West, and all kinds of random things will start to happen. So this was a lesson learned from a client that brought us in 3 years ago we thought might be interesting to you. At the end of the day, it wasn't a tool problem. It was a process and methodology problem. The tool was set up to effectively do what it was supposed to do, but there was no alignment between the two tools, which meant there was no alignment on the process, which meant we couldn't align the data. So again, taking a step back and sometimes analyzing the process before you implement the tool could go a long way, even in an Agile tool. So, hop forward to last year. A lot of changes happened in the market in the last 3 or 4 years. And a lot of organizations have become full safe Agile. That's a core methodology they're using. We were working with one of them who actually was very product centric. They had already moved from projects to products. They had over 600 people working on products, and they were using an IDE called Jira. Most people know about Jira to manage their work and their sprints. So that was going pretty well. The challenge is that the VP came to us with a pain point, and that key pain point was he had no visibility into what people were working on and no visibility of what he was spending across all his Agile projects. They literally would initiate their projects based off of a high-level forecast that was given to them by the Scrum Masters, plug it in their financial system, forecast the budget, and then every 6 months get a report as to how things were going. And this just wasn't acceptable to that VP. There also wasn't a method for progress tracking or doing any kind of time tracking, because a tool like Jira and DevOps, they're not time tracking tools, they're development environments. So there was an inherent challenge in getting actuals to do any kind of resource and work forecasting. So the solution we put in place implemented, again, Project Online and started to do epic level scheduling in Project Online, but they also put line items in every project schedule for doing time tracking on a daily and weekly basis. Those line items, time tracking per project, showed up in each developer's timesheet that they would log into once a week and log their time against the specific activity or project. And then this all rolled up into reporting in Power BI that allowed them to do resource utilization forecasting. By doing this and getting ahead of this, we were able to successfully map project level progress to budgets for senior management and also do resource forecasting. So really, by taking a step backwards and really making some high level decisions on a strategy and aligning the development environment, the DevOps tool, with your project management tool, they're able to get the kind of information out. People are using the tools they need to use every day. And we fixed a process problem with a tool through some process alignment. This is a much better way to go about it versus the first thing we showed you in the first example from 3 years ago. So while organizations have changed and processes changed, hopefully you see that spending a little bit of time on the planning side of this can really go a long way and add some value. Also, the key here is that Agile doesn't mean a lack of accountability. Agile's getting kind of a bad rap in the market, but as long as you can go in and have your developers track their actuals at a very high level, then you've got accountability behind activities. They can work in the environment they want, but you can still get the reporting you need to actually plan for and run the business. So, we wanted to take you through some examples of how some organizations are using these tools to actually manage throughout this life cycle. And the beginning of the life cycle begins with intake. Your project intake or your requests are going to come in through your Project Online system, where someone's going to come in and request a new project. It may be a software development project. It may be Waterfall or Agile. You can decide up front or as you get farther into the planning cycle. You're going to be able to do your resource forecasting using something called resource engagements in Project Online, which lets you forecast out resources at an FTE level and start to look at resource allocation versus workload, what's your availability versus your demand. And then you can implement a consistent governance process. So every project that comes in, a Waterfall project, an Agile project, they're going to follow a common methodology for intake, approval, acceptance, review, and actually management throughout the life cycle. Now, we're going to have different types of metrics we're going to be measuring on the different projects. We're going to have different levels of schedules and different types of resources, but Project Online takes all that into consideration, allows you to implement these essentially as templates. So your PPM, you're going to be using your PPM system for your intake and your demand management. You're also going to be using PPM to do your portfolio analysis, and we find most organizations that are successfully managing portfolios are using this part of the tool. And there's really 2 or 3 parts of the tool. The first is the ability to go and value rank and prioritize your projects. Really important to make sure you're going to be investing in the right projects, doing the right projects that give you the most business value. Whether it's Waterfall or Agile, you don't want to spend money on projects that are low value to the organization. So you want to make sure you can remove the low value projects. And Gartner and Forrester will tell you that simply by looking at your portfolio and doing a value analysis, you can remove 10 to 15% annually of spend on projects you probably shouldn't be doing. So Project Online supports the requirement or the need to do that value analysis and prioritization. It's also going to help you do your selection and optimization. So you can line up all your Waterfall projects, all your Agile projects, or all your projects as a part of the whole portfolio. You can line them up by release train. You can line them up by epic. You can line them up by product and do, hey, which of the different phases of the product should we be doing in order to get the most business value? So there's a portfolio selection and optimization toolkit built into the Project Online platform that lets you do this. So this is all the upfront analysis and planning to determine what are the right investments to make and in what order you're going to be doing them. But once you've made those decisions, you can then go in, and this is where PPM adds some value as well, to do your portfolio roll-ups. And you'll see a view here where we can go in and look at all of our projects by methodology. they're being managed differently. They're being managed by different teams and different groups, and that's okay. They're still projects. They still have budgets, and they still have resources. So I can very quickly go into my project online system. I can look at all of my Agile projects, my Waterfall projects, my hybrid, which are kind of my Agile projects down at the bottom, and I can look at the status, the health, the progress, the product it's supporting, the cost, the value or the benefit I'm receiving, and any other metadata I want to capture. So PPM and Project Online are really valuable for doing those portfolio rollups. It's really what the system is designed to do, and you can certainly separate out your projects through different life cycles: Waterfall, Agile, Agile. Then we can do our resource management. We're typically doing our first pass resource management in our Project Online system, because we can go in, we can look at a resource, we can look at multiple resources and look at their capacity, their demand, and their utilization, and start to look, do I have people working on more maintenance work than project work? Or do I want to shift someone like Aaron over to do more sprints, work on more epics and more features we have going on the Agile projects versus the Waterfall projects he's working on today? So it allows me to do my resource allocation and resource management in a very dynamic way. Project Online is also going to give us a drill down into a resource's total workload. And this is more of a time phase look. If you look at it, I have someone like Tom, and he's got a series of projects, and they can be Waterfall, Agile, maintenance, operations, and I can very quickly see what his assigned work is, when he's going to be finishing with that assigned work, so I can do better allocation across my portfolio and make sure I have the right resources working on the right projects. So resource management is a core capability of Project Online and PPM. Once we get into execution, we're going to be building project schedules. So for our Waterfall projects, we're going to have detailed work breakdown structures. For our Agile projects, we're probably tracking either an epic or an iteration level, most likely an epic level or just a time tracking level. So somebody like Tom could go in, look at all of his projects for the week, log hours at a summary level there, you can see on an iteration or on a project, and submit that back to the project manager. So for a developer to go in and just log hours is about a 5-minute activity every week, versus them having to go in and you having to translate data from your IDE or DevOps system into the PPM tool. So doing time tracking is a core component, and it's very, very simple and very easy. But all the work on the development side is going to happen in Azure DevOps. And this is where Azure DevOps is a super tool for allowing your users to go in, your developers to go in. They can quickly view all the projects they're assigned to. They can drill into the projects, look at the sprints and iterations. So I can go in and look at my 7 or 8 projects. I can open that window up and I can see all of the releases. Below the level of releases, I have products. So you can see in purple. Then I've got different user stories, which are in blue. And then I've got tasks, which I'm assigned, or different team members on the team are assigned. So I've got that hierarchy of epic, feature, user story, and task. And that's where I'm keeping my progress up to date as it relates to the detailed activities I'm working on. The good news is your developers are simply going to be going in and progressing here, and then once a week going in and updating their timesheet. Very, very quick and easy. A lot of people have wanted to try to map at a detailed level, a task and a user story and a feature and an epic into a WBS. And there are some inherent challenges in that, because if I go in as a developer and I look at the different activities I have, I've got active activities, I've got resolved activities, I've got sprints. And then if I click in on any of the user stories I'm supposed to be updating, you'll see I can put notes and details here, but essentially I'm going to be updating work. So there's 40 hours, I've done 20 and there's 20 more to go, but I'm not saying exactly when I'm doing that. I'm actually logging that on a certain point in time, and it's not saying I did 8 hours today or 4 hours yesterday or 2 hours the day before. So that concept of time-phased work isn't really a part of Azure DevOps or any development operations suite. It's something that their tools aren't really designed to do that. They're supposed to be very flexible and very agile in nature. So what we want to do is come up with a setup for our DevOps environment that works for your development teams to plan, track, and manage their Agile reporting, and also a way to track actuals in time in the time tracking tool in Project Online and marry those up at the right level of detail. So people aren't hopping back and forth. They're doing all their work in one place and simply doing a progress update in another. We are getting to a point now where we can pull data over at a certain summary level if it's updated in the DevOps tool. So in one of our future webinars, we're going to show you an example of that automation. But that's automation that will work, that will give you some value versus having to map it over to an epic or a feature level, which we don't recommend down here at a task level. There's just too much detail, and project and DevOps think and Jira think in a very, very different way when it comes to tasks. So from here, the good news is we have lots of analytics. Within DevOps, we have an analytics bolt-on that lets us drill down into work and status and activities being done over a point in time. We can look at 30 and 60, 90 days. We can look at sprints and burn downs. And we're going to have charts. So you can see we're going to have a sprint summary. We're going to have a burn down. We're going to see how many sprints we have active, how many features and stories we're working on. We're going to see the epic and the feature train at the top. So it's all going to be there in Azure DevOps, all the reporting we need to do our day-to-day management. We don't leave DevOps for that, and that's fully integrated. What's really nice is all this DevOps data is available through Power BI as well. So if I were to hop over here, this is actually DevOps data available in Power BI for dashboards. So I can start to see, do I have a series of issues that are coming up on some of my different sprints? Are sprints running ahead or behind? Do I have a resource challenge? Am I under-delivering on the value that I'm supposed to be with a specific epic or sprint? So what we can do is we can actually use Power BI to extract the data from Azure DevOps and do our trending analytics and reporting and make that available to some of our managers so they can visualize how our progress is. So there's reporting not only in DevOps, but from Power BI as well. And then we also have reporting from Project Online coming to Power BI. So as an executive, I can get in and look at a portfolio overview. I can see different portfolios, how many risks and issues I have, what's my total spend. And we may have a portfolio of Agile products, which have projects within them that we can integrate that data in. So we have progress on our Agile projects, as well as progress on our Waterfall projects in one place. But we can also create some portfolio dashboards and map those over using Agile terminology. You'll see here we have products, we have strategic themes, we have pillars, and then we have different components that are Agile or sprint specific in nature. So we can say, hey, what are the projects going on mapping to a specific product we have, or to a specific pillar, or to a value point we have. So we can do Power BI dynamic reporting off of our data in Project Online, in Power BI, and a combination of both to help drive better decision making. And this is really, once you get the process in place, the tools can very nicely and layer on top of that to help you make the right decisions. But when we look at it from an overall solution structure, there's really two sides to the equation. Everything in green is your PPM solution. It's the things you're doing to generate business demand, new projects, you're doing your portfolio selection and analysis. You may be measuring the value of portfolios differently, your Agile projects based off of different kind of business value or the value stream thinking, versus your waterfall projects. You may be kind of thinking in terms of a traditional business case, and that's fine. You can have different portfolios. We still want to do our resource planning and our resource management in the tool, and that's where we have our enterprise resource pool. We're going to do our financial planning and financial management integrating with our financial system. We're going to do time tracking and time reporting in PPM, and BI and reporting, which is going to kind of layer on top of this. And if you think about it in the traditional waterfall world, we've got requirements and design, implementation, verification, testing, and maintenance. That's where we're going to be using Project Online to manage at a detailed level. When we're doing our Agile lifecycle and work management, that's where we're using Azure DevOps, where we do our detailed product planning, our release planning, we do sprint planning, we do our testing and test management. It acts as our code repository, so it's the one place to go for all of our development and development activities. And the nice thing is we can layer Power BI on top of this so that we can get analytics across the entire platform. So just moving forward with some deployment good practices. The first one is we always recommend you implement a really sound PPM system that aligns with your overall strategy for project management. If you're getting into a world where you're doing hybrid projects, then design it with hybrid projects in mind. If you're doing waterfall now and you're going to move into Agile in the next 12 to 18 months, design around waterfall, but leave yourself open to Agile and start thinking like, how am I going to manage Agile projects in this, and what's the impact on my portfolio going to be? You also want to know how you're going to track and manage those Agile projects, and keep in mind it's going to be different. You're going to have different players, a different process, a different set of tools, as we showed you today, and you need to think about each of these components and how it's going to map to your PPM system. You still need to do all the things to get projects reviewed and approved and into an intake cycle, but after that point, it's going to split off, and work is going to be managed in a very, very different way, as well as you're going to be measuring value and progress in a different way. You need to understand that and determine how you're going to do that. You also want to think about developing an integrated process that everybody can understand and agree to across every project type, understanding there will be differences. And ideally, that will be driven by involvement from your PMO. We find a lot of DevOps organizations, DevOps environments are being rolled out without the involvement of the PMO. And the PMO can only add value here because a lot of times that PMO is responsible for rolling up reporting to an executive level. And if 40% of the project investment isn't included in the reporting, you're going to have a big problem. There's going to be a big gap, and there's going to be more pressure on the development teams to produce data that they traditionally wouldn't produce. So our biggest recommendation here, if you do anything, is involve the PMO in your Azure DevOps rollout and come up with a unified strategy for using both tools together. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be technically integrated. You also want to work with the Agile teams because they do have their own mindset to show them the value PPM can provide them, but not asking them to change their work style, not asking them to update lots of information in the PPM system. They don't think in terms of detailed WBSs. They think in terms of epics, sprints, features, and tasks and activities. So let them do that, but understand and get their input and get them involved in, hey, here's how PPM can add value to your world. You'll also want, and very importantly, develop a reporting structure that meets everybody's needs. If you're going to be expected to do enterprise level reporting across every project you have, you better be darn sure you can actually get the data and measure it for your Agile projects as well as your Waterfall projects all into one place and get reporting out. And that's where a tool like Power BI can be really, really valuable. You certainly need to continue to think about the actual metrics that are going to be behind this, but having a reporting structure, kind of thinking with the end in mind, is critical. Okay? And just remember, from a technology perspective, we get a lot of folks that kind of go online and they see demos and go, wow, this Azure DevOps and Project and Jira, they all work together. I can push a button and data flows in all different directions. The reality is, and hopefully the examples we gave of what happened 3 years ago and last year, there is no technical magic bullet for this stuff. It all gets down to the process. And the out-of-the-box connectors that a lot of companies will tell you about, or the solutions that are out there, they all require customization, because I can guarantee your environment is going to be set up a lot different than a lot of other organizations. You're going to have a different level of maturity. You're going to have different types of templates, a different process, kind of the one to many, many to many we talked about can be a challenge as well. So remember that those are just accelerators that are going to take work and customization. And just remember that from a DevOps perspective, there's no concept of a baseline in your DevOps tool. So there's no starting point or snapshot from which we can measure from. There's also no concept of time phase data. So if I look at a timesheet, I think day by day or week by week. That's not how a DevOps tool is designed to work on purpose. So you're not going to get a mapping between the actual and the plan if you try to just take data from DevOps and pull it over. You're going to be missing 2 of the 3 fields needed to do that. So you really have to come up with a really good strategy. And if you're going to do any kind of technical integration, it's fine. Just understand the limitations behind that, the challenges, and then what's really important from a measurement perspective to get data and make business decisions. So hopefully this gives you a good feeling for some of the deployment good practices. We're going to open the floor to questions here in a second, but we will let you know if you are interested in getting an evaluation and moving forward with a plan. We do offer Project Online and Azure DevOps assessments and consulting around that. We can come in and assess your current environment and give you recommendations. We can also leverage your Microsoft Deployment Planning Services days you get with your Microsoft Enterprise Agreement to provide a findings and recommendations document and a roadmap. If you're interested in this, reach out to myself or Tom Henry, your account managers here at Progility, and we'll help you get that in place. And again, that's funded by Microsoft, so there's no cost to you for us doing that assessment. So at this point, we're actually going to stop the recording, and we're going to answer any questions.